Now let's go back to chapter 20, verse 22. And the Lord said to Moses, Thus you shall say to the people of Israel, You have seen for yourselves that I have talked with you from heaven. You shall not make gods of silver to be with me, nor shall you make for yourselves gods of gold. An altar of earth you shall make for me, and sacrifice on it your burnt offerings, and your peace offerings, your sheep and your oxen, in every place where I cause my name to be remembered. I will come to you and bless you. If you make me an altar of stone, you shall not build it of hewn stones. For if you wield your tool on it, you profane it. And you shall not go up by steps to my altar, that your nakedness be not exposed on it. Okay, now we're going to take a look at the individual commandments. Exodus 20, verse 2 and 3 is the first commandment. And it says, I am the Lord your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of slavery. You shall have no other gods before me. See, if you don't know who the Lord your God is, you may as well forget the rest of the commandments, because they will be meaningless to you. Commandment number 2 is, You shall not make for yourself a carved image, or any likeness of anything that is in heaven above, or that is in the earth beneath, or that is in the water underneath. You shall not bow down to them, or serve them, for I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God, visiting the iniquity of the fathers on the children to the third and fourth generation of those who hate me, but showing steadfast love to thousands of those who love me and keep my commandments. I think we would all do very well to understand that not keeping his commandments means he thinks we're showing hatred for him. And that keeping his commandments means that, he thinks that we're loving him. So that right there should be enough to make us want to keep the commandments. Now let's look at what is the meaning of this second commandment. Is it about idolatry, or is it about more than that? Now this is a controversial area, and most people disagree with me. But when I look at this in the plain Peshat meaning, I can see only one definition that is possible, and that is that this commandment deals with images. It does not deal directly with other gods. The first commandment deals with other gods. Other gods means idolatry. This commandment deals with images, you see, but it is related to idolatry because, the number one thing that pagans do is use images that serve the purpose as a reference to their pagan god that they worship. Now let me tell you, all idols are images, but not all images are idols. Yet this verse says, You shall not make for yourself a carved image, which is a little 3D thing called a statue, or any likeness of anything. Okay, now we're going to take a little bit further look at this. Because idolatry, this commandment is associated with idolatry in most people's minds. But idolatry is not the nebulous, over-spiritualized thought process that it has been relegated to. First of all, as I said, commandment number 1 deals with having no other gods. That's idolatry. So, how does God instruct us to avoid the danger of that practice? Well, he gives us 3 instructions. He says, don't make images, because images can be turned into things that you end up worshiping. In fact, he says that in chapter 4, verses 12 and 15, where he says, "You did not see a similitude," which is the same word as likeness, "of me." Now, there are two kinds of images: carved images and likenesses. Pesel is the word that is used, that is translated to mean carved image, and it's a statue. A statue is something that is often worshipped, but is not always worshipped. And temunah, which means likeness, or it's sometimes translated as similitude. It's not a 3D image like a carved image. It is an image on a flat surface. So these are what the Lord tells us not to make for ourselves. Now, the reason for not making them is because people have turned everything in nature into an image for worship. Some images are used only as talismans that are said to have specific powers, and while they are not literally worshipped, they supersede God's power, as in His power to protect you. That's most often what talismans are used for, is protection. And then some images are used only for, adoring or admiring of something or someone. And they supersede or coincide with adoring or admiration of God, right? Is anything in our world supposed to be adored or admired more than God? Well, I don't think so. Now, the second instruction in this commandment is to not bow yourself to images. And what that means is literally don't prostrate yourself. Don't kneel, don't crouch, don't be humbly beseeching the image, don't do obeisance, don't be reverent toward the image, don't stoop. It means don't worship. The Hebrew word for bow is shakah, and that's what its meanings are. Now, it also says, don't worship. Now, the Hebrew word for that is abad, and it literally means do not become a bondman. Don't bind yourself to that image. Are we not bond servants to Jehovah? We are not to be bond servants to any other god. Don't worship images. It's not talking about here, don't worship idols, don't worship other gods. It's talking about don't worship images. When Deuteronomy comes up, we'll talk more about this, but I want to bring up Deuteronomy 4:15. God says, "Take therefore good heed to yourselves, for you saw no manner of similitude," which there's that word for likeness again, "on the day that the Lord spoke to you in Horeb out of the midst of the fire." The idea is that if God doesn't want us to have an image of Him, who do we think we are? Now, I realize I'm probably going to lose a lot of my audience over this one. But you don't have to agree with me. I'm just telling you my interpretation of this. And again, I'm mostly alone in this interpretation. Now, moving on, Exodus 20, verse 7, "You shall not take the name of the Lord your God in vain, for the Lord will not hold him guiltless who takes his name in vain." Well, a lot of people say that this is, when you use God's name as a swear word or as a curse. Well, yes, that's part of it. But really, the taking of His name in vain is when you claim that you belong to Him, that He is your Father, and then you go out and you do something that He says don't do. It's kind of like in your household, if you have a child and the child goes out and does something that is totally against the morals and ethics of your family. they have taken your family name in vain. They have profaned your name. Exodus 20 verse 8 is, remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but the seventh day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. On it you shall do no work, you, your son, your daughter, your male servant, your female servant, your livestock, the sojourner who is within your gates. For in 6 days the Lord made the heaven and the earth, the sea, and all that is in them, and rested on the seventh day. Therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and made it holy. You know, I've said this before in another Torah portion. This word remember is zakar, which means to mark. The Sabbath is God's mark on you. So it's not to be relegated to a mere thought process. It's not, today is the Sabbath day, but I'm just going to go out here and mow the yard. Or I'm going to go out to the mall and go shopping. No, if you have His mark on you, those are things you won't do. If you have the enemy's mark on you, those are things you will do. So be careful about whose mark you are taking, because the Sabbath is God's mark. It is His wedding ring that He gave to you. It's the thing that makes visible to the world just who it is that is your God. So be careful about that. Verse 12, honor your father and your mother, that your days may be long in the land that the Lord your God is giving you. Verse 13, you shall not murder. Now there are several words that are translated both as kill or murder, and these two of them are ratzak and nakah. Well, both of them are translated as murder, and both of them are translated as kill. And then there are some other words that are related to slaughtering the sacrifices that I'm not going to bring into this discussion. But here's what I want to say about it. Murder is an intentional personal act against another that is unlawful and is not related to warfare or self-defense. Murder is not a just act, but warfare can be a just act, because God has commanded in certain times for us to go to war. You know, God allowed for the soldiers, the warriors, at the end of a war to have a 7-day period of being unclean, in which they would have to mikvah in order to go back into the camp. Well, being unclean is not a sin. Therefore, their having been at war is not a sin. It made them unclean because of dealing with the carcasses. So we see here that God makes provision for war and self-defense. Murder is not justified killing. Verse 14, you shall not commit adultery, you shall not steal, you shall not bear false witness against your neighbor, and you shall not covet. Okay, those are the commandments, and I'm out of time now, but I want to just remind you how important Yitro is as a Torah portion, because it portrays the first time that the Torah was given and prophesies about the second time that the Torah will be given, and it starts the process of the children of Israel learning what is required if you're going to live in God's house, if you're going to be in His kingdom. Not just anything goes in His kingdom. And so we need to learn these rules, because we're getting close to being in the kingdom. Shabbat Shalom.